So I watched John Wick Chapter 4, and it was fantastic. If you know me well enough, you'll know that I am a huge fan of the John Wick film franchise. I have all 3 films on Steelcase Blu-ray. I have a poster of John Wick Chapter 3 Parabellum in the podcast room, and I even did my college thesis on John Wick as a universe. That was more so to do with the mythology and the sort of Old Testament inspiration behind John Wick as sort of a world building technique. And I sort of went into depth about how John Wick as a character and as a world within that franchise is sort of a modern mythology in a sense. But I won't get too much into that right now, and I even wrote that thesis before the 3rd movie was even out, so really I was just working off the first 2. And looking back on it, I probably would have changed a lot about what I wrote and the sort of correlations that I made between John Wick and mythology as a whole, but regardless, that's for another video potentially. But needless to say, I was excited to see this movie. I was very pumped up. I don't usually get hyped for films that are coming out because I don't want to overhype myself and then end up being disappointed in what I ultimately watch. But John Wick is a franchise that I think has been very consistently good and high quality in terms of the action and the choreography and the sort of tone that those movies go for. So I usually give myself a pass in letting myself get excited for another film that's coming out within this franchise, and I am happy to say that this one is absolutely incredible. This is going to be a spoiler-free review, so don't worry, I won't give anything away about the story or what happens to the characters. I will give a quick kind of synopsis, and then I'll go into my thoughts on the movie overall. So essentially, this film was directed by Chad Stahelski, who has directed all the previous John Wick movies before. He co-directed the first John Wick with David Leitch, and then he went on to do the rest of the films on his own, whereas David Leitch, I think, has stayed on as an executive producer in a sense. But they've all starred Keanu Reeves, and it essentially follows him as a hitman who seeks revenge in the first movie after someone does him wrong. The subsequent films that follow after are him dealing with the consequences of the actions that he takes in the first film, and they sort of spiral into a domino effect that ends up with him killing a shit ton of people. This film continues to follow him as he has to go up against the High Table, and he is basically challenged by this character who's played by Bill Skarsgård. He plays the Marquis de Gramont, and he's acting as sort of an agent of the High Table in order to hunt John Wick down. Ian McShane returns in this movie as the manager of the Continental Hotel, along with Lance Reddick, who sadly passed away a week before this movie was set to premiere, so rest in peace, Lance Reddick. I think they do a really good job in dedicating this film to him, and it feels very appropriate and very respectful to him as an actor and the character that he plays. Lawrence Fishburne returns as the Bowery King. That was introduced in the second movie. We get introduced to a bunch of new characters that add another angle to this film specifically. You've got Donnie Yen as Kane, who is a blind assassin who is a friend of John Wick's, but he's forced to go up against him. You've got Shamir Anderson, who plays Mr. Nobody, who is a bounty hunter who is tracking John Wick throughout the film. And then you've also got Scott Adkins as Killa, who is a member of the High Table who has a very distinct and antagonistic personality towards John Wick. I will just say that. And finally, you've got Rina Sawayama, I hope I pronounced that right, as Akira, who is the daughter of another friend of John Wick's, who essentially fights with bow and arrows and knives and has a very quick style of combat. I really like the new characters that they introduce in this film. I think that overall they add another element of it that keeps it fresh and entertaining for the viewer to watch. Kane's fighting style seems very reminiscent of the sort of Daredevil fighting style that we get in the Netflix Daredevil TV show, but Donnie Yen, I think, is a really standout performance in this movie. I think that he delivers a lot in terms of the stunt work and the performance as Kane. It's very unique and something that I don't think I've ever experienced in a film before, at least myself, and it was really entertaining to watch him take down bad guys while also being a blind man. Scott Adkins is very interesting as Killa. He essentially plays this very bombastic kind of mobster type German guy. He's quite eccentric and antagonistic, and the way he moves in that fat suit while he's fighting is really entertaining and compelling to watch, almost from a comical standpoint, but it feels very purposefully that way. Shamir Anderson is very fun to watch as the tracker slash Mr. Nobody. His fighting style feels very sort of improvised and in the moment, but you also get the sense that he really plans ahead for certain things to unfold, and he also has a attack dog companion. You know, dogs throughout this series have been at the forefront since the very beginning of the franchise. And then the character of Akira is really fun to watch, and I actually wish that we got more of her. Her fighting style introduces a sort of bow and arrow kind of combat style, along with very quick knife movements, and is essentially very reminiscent of a sort of ninja style of combat that you get a little bit within the third film, but you don't really get as much in that one as you do this one. But like I said before, I wish we got a little more of her because she was very fun to watch. And of course, you've got Keanu Reeves as John Wick. He's always entertaining. He's always finding new and improvised ways to fight against all these dudes. There's a scene involving nunchucks that's really fun, and you get the sense that he's putting his heart and soul into this. Keanu Reeves isn't getting any younger. He's 58 years old. He's almost 60, and it's still quite impressive how he's able to move and fight and perform all these stunts in this movie, given his age at the time. And I really do think that he's the heart and soul of these films. I think that without Keanu Reeves, this film series really wouldn't have much to stand on. If there was another actor that was playing John Wick, I don't think these films would be as successful as they are today. The action itself and the set pieces are simply stunning and really compelling to see. There's an amazing scene involving nunchucks, like I said earlier. There is an awesomely done scene that is very reminiscent of the sort of kind of top-down shooter style that you see in some video games, such as Hotline Miami. You've got a fantastic scene involving the nightclub. It's sort of almost a reference to the first movie's nightclub scene, essentially, but this one feels like it's on a grander scale, and it feels more so like a build-up, essentially, to a boss fight in a video game that is really fun and over the top, but in a super compelling and hard-hitting way. There's a scene in this movie that involves a staircase that is just really impressive overall, and I think that a lot of the action and the set pieces in this movie take it to another level that the previous films hadn't before. A lot of the technical aspects of this movie are just really impressive. I really enjoyed the music in this. A lot of the compositions that they include feel like there are remixes and revisits to older compositions that we got in previous movies, and the camera work in this is super impressive and I think is one of the best in the series overall. Some of the issues I had with the previous John Wick films is that whenever they showed the cityscape, it always felt like they were kind of using stock video for the kind of locations that they wanted to establish, but in this movie in particular, it feels like they sort of forego that and create these establishing shots on their own, and it really creates a unique through line throughout the entire movie and gives it a really kind of grandiose tone that I don't think you really get in the previous films. I want to talk about the writing and the dialogue for a second before I conclude. The writing has never been anything that is super important in the John Wick franchise. Essentially, how I view these movies and how I view the writing in relation to them is that the writing always feels kind of supplementary to the action set pieces and the sort of stunt work that goes into it. It always feels like each scenario and each piece of dialogue that's delivered is only really there to serve the purpose of getting you to the next fight scene that you get to experience, and I've never particularly had an issue with that sort of style of telling the story. It always feels like they have an idea for a location and an action set piece, and then they kind of form the story around that. And for the John Wick franchise specifically, I think it works really well to their advantage, especially since each fight scene and each setting that it takes place in feels very unique and very stylistic to that specific sort of scene. But all that to say that the writing in this franchise as a whole hasn't really been the strongest, and I would say that's still the case with this movie. I started to get a little worried about the pacing and the runtime at first when the movie started, because it starts out with a very quick action scene that lasts a few minutes, and then it cuts to different scenes of characters having dialogue in different locations, and you get to learn and are introduced to new characters, and it almost feels a little too expositionary. Essentially what they're trying to do is they're trying to introduce you to these new figures that you're going to see throughout the film, and they do it in a way that almost feels a little unearned. Essentially what they wanted for us is they wanted to introduce these characters for us to get attached to, so then when something happens involving these characters, we have a basis to care about them, where it almost feels like it's kind of unnecessary. Like I said before, people aren't going into these movies to see people talking to each other or to get Quentin Tarantino levels of dialogue. They're essentially there to see the action set pieces and to see Keanu Reeves shoot people in the head. But once the action started picking up again at around the half-hour point is really when this movie gripped me again, and I really can't say enough good things about the action and the pacing of it throughout this movie, despite the almost 3-hour long runtime. I could easily see some people getting tired of maybe the repetitive nature of the action, or how long certain action scenes go on for, or how ridiculous some of the stunt work seems, or the kind of lack of suspending your disbelief in terms of how hurt these characters get. But I can always easily look past that stuff, because to me these films are about having fun action and getting to watch really good gunplay, really good swordplay, really good stunt work, and really compelling action scenes overall. This film feels really grand. It feels like it's going to crescendo into something, and it feels like it goes bigger and better in a lot of different departments without sacrificing what makes it special. I also really enjoy the fact that this is a film where you could easily watch all 4 of these, and this film sort of acts as a conclusion in a way. Not to really give anything in particular away in terms of spoilers, but this movie feels like it could be where you stop watching within the franchise if they continue to make more, and be satisfied with the conclusion that you get. Chad Stahelski and Keanu Reeves have come out to say that they are giving the John Wick franchise a rest, and that if they ever want to revisit it again, it'll probably be a while before they do that. And again, with Keanu Reeves being as old as he is, and there's always the risk of running a franchise for too long that it starts to grow stale, I am glad that they are taking this break and that they've made this film as conclusive as they possibly could have, with the potential of possibly making more in the future. So I'm really satisfied about that. Overall, John Wick is a franchise that I hold near and dear to my heart. It is something that I am always excited to go back and revisit and to show other people, and is one of the most consistently good action franchises that I think we have in a modern setting. And I'm really happy to say that this one knocks it out of the park. I'm going to give John Wick Chapter 4 a 9 out of 10. Thank you for watching. Have a good day.